Hey everyone, I'm Tanner from the investment team here at the LegalTech Fund. A few weeks ago, Amir, co founder and CEO of Navies, joined us on In Studio. Navies is tackling one of the most painful and overlooked workflows in private markets, and that's LP transfers in the secondaries market. These processes are still run through scattered emails, red lines, and manual coordination across multiple parties. They're slow, expensive, and highly operational, often taking months to complete. Amir and his team are building an end to end operating system for transfers, bringing everything into a single workspace that manages the full life cycle from GP consents and due diligence through to signing, invoicing, and closing. In this episode, we're going to unpack what Navies is seeing across fund managers, law firms, and investors. We're going to look where automation is already transforming transfers, where friction still exists, and how turning this into structured, systematized workflows changes everything downstream. Check it out. Would love to start on where your founding journey began.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tanner, and thanks for the intro. So yeah, my journey started as a funds lawyer. I worked for a few years at Cleary Gottlieb and Kirkland and Ellis, and basically always did a bit of coding on the side. Just picked it up for fun, and decided to leave my full time job at K&E recently in July last year, actually, to set up navies. And we admittedly went after a wedge into the kind of fund formation and I guess fund operations market. And the idea was to build software around um, LP transfers as a starter. The idea was really for us to make sure that we tackle inefficiencies with software. And we saw that this was one of the problems that was worth tackling because it costs law firms a lot of money because they have to often write off a lot of these fees. GPs don't like this workflow because they spend a lot of admin overhead and it creates friction with their LPs. And obviously, the transferor and transferee, so buyer and seller of LP interests, often find this a painful and expensive process.
I love it. I mean, that segues like perfectly into our deep dive here. Let's get a clear picture of what the platform does today. And you already alluded to some of the friction and inefficiencies, but what problems are you seeking to tackle?
Yeah, so basically, we thought that the biggest inefficiency in this workflow was never the lawyers, the legal work itself. It was mainly really the infrastructure around it. I've seen a lot of brilliant lawyers work on these, LP transfers, and I would say waste, but not really waste. Just as a matter of fact, just have to spend a lot of time just doing process work, while these brilliant minds, I'm sure, would have a lot of value to add elsewhere, which is to work on the actual, transaction, negotiation, the documents, etc., rather than compiling closing Bibles and running red lines and just managing who signed what when, essentially. And so our software basically brings all the parties to a transfer under one roof. So the buyer, the seller, and the general partner, as well as their advisors. And the reason it is a sort of a somewhat complicated workflow to solve in software is because of the permissions and because of the roles of each of these parties inside the transaction. So essentially, to recap, the idea is that brilliant lawyers were spending hours on process, and we thought that their time was better spent on um, core legal work, and we would be basically handling the headache, which is the process through software.
You mentioned that there's multiple stakeholders and parties involved in this process. Why are LP
Mhm.
transfers such a hard problem to solve compared to other fund operations or legal workflows?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think the reason they're so uniquely hard is mainly because it's really a coordination problem that has, I would say, almost no owner, right? No one wants to deal with LP transfers. The GP considers this a bit of a headache. It's kind of like an approval system that they just need to sign off on. Lawyers don't like this work because it's very repetitive, as I said, manual and slow. And the transferors and transferees just want to get this done, and it's often part of a wider portfolio transaction that has to be sequenced sort of properly. So signing, closing, etc., and all of this has to happen kind of in sequence. So because there are so many different parties involved, at least five, often six, right? So transferor, transferee, GP, and their lawyers. That is that kind of there are no administrators also involved. So it could be often 10 parties involved in a single transaction that no one wants to deal with, really. It makes it somewhat of a hot potato and a kind of a difficult problem to solve. And I think we have solved it with our software. And sort of feedback that we've received from clients so far is that our solution works perfectly well and basically makes it such that it's almost like a one-stop shop for everything transfers, right? So you can do the whole transfer workflow without sending a single email outside of our platform.
I love it. When you talk about, the whole transfer workflow, what parts of that life cycle are you not automating today? Like where does human in the loop or human input to get deals across the line still, is still necessitated today?
Yeah, so mainly I would say it's obviously the signatures. You still need a human to sign these documents at the end of the process. There's also the approval step, which requires the general partner to sort of give their okay onto the transfer. And of course, we generate a lot of answers to the due diligence questions, to the um, PTP analysis, the tax analysis, etc., with AI, but it still needs to be reviewed by a human in sort of to confirm that the answer is accurate, because as we know with AI, there's also the problem with hallucination and perhaps inaccuracy, especially in a domain that is as nuanced as tax and due diligence and so on. So our idea is surface the answers and just let humans approve, review, and sort of lead this transaction to a close, basically.
So instead of an expensive game of hot potato, you guys have essentially created a single source of truth across GPs, LPs, councils, and all parties involved. How does that change decision making and execution speed for your customers in practice?
Yeah, so basically our solution removes a lot of the dead time between each step of the process, right? So if we say there are approximately 10 steps in every transfer, for a transfer from kind of first contact to closing, we remove all the dead time between these steps. And of course, the time searching in Outlook to determine who needs to sign what, when, as I said. And so the time saving really comes from removing these serial, I would say, maybe dependencies, and eliminating kind of status work, right? Because we used to waste so much time on just checking in and following up and responding to follow-ups and check-ins, etc., and just coordinating the process. So by removing all this kind of admin processy overhead, we take down the time spent on a transfer from 20 plus hours to single digit hours, right? So we say it's on average between 2 to 3 hours tops on pure legal work rather than 20.
And when you talk about, the unit of hours saved, what does that look like in practice for like days to close? Is it, from like a 90-day window timeline to close versus folks using your platform? What does it look like?
Yeah, so it gets down from 19 days to a matter of really, we've done some testing, obviously, also internally. You are fully able to close a transfer end to end in a matter of hours, really. So from 90 days to hours. But of course, because there's a bit of sequencing that has to happen and people need to kind of engage and cooperate and kind of work together, we expect that what we've seen so far on the platform is that it would take a couple of days. We expect that this could really go down to hours if everyone is kind of together on the platform and working through these transfer steps.
And in addition to the speed, I mean, when you think about the whole sequence of the process and events, it can be like a entangled web of unstructured, disparate parties. When you
Mm.
structure the transfer data, for things after closing, how does that change things, whether that's LP reporting, set up for future transactions, LP
Mhm.
registers? Like, how does Navy set folks up for success in the future as well?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's kind of like an added value that people often forget because we're so focused on the time and value element, just like one-to-one ROI almost. But there's another element that we are trying to surface and showcase often, which is the fact that transfers today are basically produce data that is never captured anywhere, right? So people just do the transfer and call it a day, and that's it. But once the data is structured, it becomes, I think, the downstream workflows that kind of depend on this transaction, which is like the LP register, future transfers as well, become stop being manual and become much more streamlined and efficient as well. So there's a knock-on effect on future transactions and downstream transactions that happen. So for example, if you were to transfer an interest from investor A to investor B and need to issue your capital call within the next 15 days and haven't updated your LP register right after the closing, then you're sending the capital call to a wrong investor, because investor A is no longer an investor in your fund. So our solution not only streamlines a process end to end, but also makes everything downstream much, much, much more efficient and sort of cleaner, and obviously reduces the room for errors because software, as we know, makes it a bit more bulletproof than humans updating Excel sheets at 3 a.m.
Awesome. I want to take maybe a step back as you talk about like downstream efficiencies. I'd love to double click on all of the parties involved, whether it's the law firms, the funds, the LPs. Like, how do they come to navies, and how do you improve the inefficiencies of each of those parties' processes?
Yeah. So the idea is that if a returning LP has to fill out a AML KYC process, so if they've already done a transfer on our platform, they don't need to do it again, right? Because they've already been cleared from an AML KYC for this fund manager and within those requirements, of course. And if an LP has already completed a subscription agreement, it auto-populates that subscription agreement for them, based on answers they've given in the past. And similarly, if they've already answered a question on due diligence and so on, we are able to surface those answers with AI and sort of kind of pre-populate or help them populate these questions as well. And of course, if those LPs are returning, they will see the compounding efficiency happen. The more transfers they do, the more efficiencies, of course.
I love it. Let's end on a forward looking note. Looking ahead, you're expanding into continuation vehicles and other adjacent workflows. How is Navy's evolving into a broader OS for private markets?
Yeah. So our idea was always that transfers are the wedge into a bigger market, right? And our platform kind of extends to every workflow, and we're kind of just testing our hypotheses with LP transfers, mainly, as I said, because it's one of those that no one wants to deal with the old school way. But there are so much more efficiencies that we can draw from the LP transfer process, even on a primary subscription platform, for example. In terms of continuation vehicles, the natural steps are kind of similar. The process is kind of similar. The GP negotiating with exiting or rolling LPs, etc. Obviously, each workflow comes with complexities, but we think that based on our experience now and the templates we've built and kind of our knowledge, and obviously, of course, our relationships with the fund managers and their law firms, that we're able to build so many more workflows that will save a lot of headache in terms of process and sort of manual processing. And our core hypothesis is that AI is great, it works, it's amazing, but adding an AI layer on top of existing workflows is less efficient than adding an AI layer on a software tool, right? So if you were to ask Query your Outlook inbox and say, how many transfers did we do last year? There are good chances that your AI may not get it right. But if you were to query navies as to how many transfers you've done last year, not only could it tell you how many transfers you've done last year, it could also identify your investor, the existing and exiting investors that have done the most transfers, and sort of liquidity needs across multiple investors, and so on and so forth. So step one, build the software. Step two, add an AI layer on top of it. And this is where we're heading, I hope.
I love it. Amir, it's always great to spend some time together. Thanks so much for joining
Likewise.
us in studio,
Thank you.
and we'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Tanner. Have a good one.